for example, another big contractor.
I'm not allowed to say.
And Bechtel?
Sad to say, I'm not allowed to say.
So would it be fair to say, to deduce, that there are most of the major American contractors involved in cases which are sealed and which we effectively can't talk about?
That would be a fair inference, but I'm not allowed to say.
But there are a few whistleblowers who brought private cases and can't be gagged. I set out on a trip across America to find them and discover how the greatest heist in history happened and who'd pocketed the cash.
You got to help me.
I headed first to Texas, heartland of the Republican Party, and President George Bush. Home originally to one of America's biggest corporations, Halliburton. They started out in oil, but found war was profitable too, from Vietnam to Bosnia, now Iraq.
Our employees are doing a great job. We're feeding the soldiers, we're rebuilding Iraq.
Halliburton can perform miracles of logistics. They struck deals to bring all-American brands like Burger King and Subway to the front line. $25 billion worth of US government contracts in all. They've kept the soldiers happy, but what about the taxpayer? It was in Texas that I met another whistleblower. His job was to keep an eye on the catering contracts. Barrington Godfrey was an auditor for KBR, the Halliburton subsidiary which fed the troops so well.
I was told, don't worry about the cost of these things. Don't worry about it, whether it's competitive or not. This is what's important. We have to have cash flow.
With most contracts, you agree a price before you start to encourage efficiency. But in Iraq, most contracts were cost plus. Whatever KBR spent, their costs would be covered, plus a percentage on top.
That's the KBR arrangement with the government. It's cost plus. So basically, the more money that flows, the more money KBR makes.
When Barrington did a head count at an army base in Mosul and compared it to KBR's invoices, he was puzzled. The company was charging for thousands of meals they weren't actually serving.
How much do you think that all added up to?
Well, I've done estimates in the Mosul area, $10 to $15 million, just in the time I was involved.
$10 to $15 million just in the few months you were there?
For one site.
The more that Halliburton claims to spend, the more it can bill to the government. As one of our clients testified before Congress, her boss told her, don't worry about it, it's cost plus, baby. And the more they bill, the more they make.
Halliburton, proud to serve our troops.
How did Halliburton win such fat contracts in Mr. Bush's war?
Bad-looking birds.
As America was counting down to war, a contract worth potentially $7 billion landed on the desk of a top official at the Pentagon. But not just any official.
They called me a stickler for the rules, and but that was my job. That was the oath of office that I had taken.
The most senior civilian in charge of contracting for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Bunny Greenhouse, was surprised. There was only one company bidding for the contract to rebuild Iraq's oil industry: Halliburton.
There were many other companies out there who could have competed for this, but they weren't aware of it. And that was not being fair, to those contractors, and it wasn't being fair to the government, because we want to make sure that we are getting best value.
Pentagon officials told her not to worry. The invasion was imminent. It justified the lack of competition. Bunny objected. Halliburton should only get a short-term contract, she said, not a 5-year option. But she was overruled.
Federal law tells us that we must conduct the business of procurement with the highest degree of integrity, beyond reproach, and with preferential treatment toward none.
Toward none.
Toward none.
And is that what was happening?
That is not what was happening. And I questioned that. I questioned what I saw were potential conflicts of interest.
Join me in a warm, thunderous Fort Hood welcome for the Vice President of the United States, Richard Cheney.
There was, of course, something special about Halliburton, something controversial. Dick Cheney. At Fort Hood in Texas, I watched as he saluted the troops.
On the ground in Iraq during all of 2007, you amassed a superb record. And I'm here to say thanks and welcome home.
Mr. Cheney was the boss of Halliburton before he became vice president and architect of the Iraq War. Oh, and he was once defense secretary too, in charge of the Pentagon.
Well, let me tell you about Halliburton, the company I ran. I'm very proud of what I did at Halliburton. The people of Halliburton are very proud of what they've accomplished, and I frankly don't feel any need to apologize for the way I've spent my time over the last 5 years as the CEO and chairman of a major American corporation.
So could the vice president be linked in any way to Halliburton's profitable relationship with the Pentagon?
Yeah, baby!
Most definitely, according to the Democrats in Congress. Henry Waxman's committee has led the charge. Unable to stop the war in Iraq, Bush's opponents have shifted their battleground to the issue of war profiteering.
Halliburton had a special relationship with very high-up people in the Bush administration. How much was that a factor in the contracts that they won and the amount of money they managed to make?
For the longest time, I accepted the word of Vice President Cheney, who had been the CEO of Halliburton, that neither he nor his office had anything to do with these contracts. But after a year of our investigations on the Iraqi contracts, we found out that it wasn't the way the Vice President claimed it to have been.
Then came the revelation of a confidential email from inside the Pentagon. It said that action on the Halliburton contract had been coordinated with the Vice President's office.
The confirmation of that contract was by a group which included Vice President Cheney's chief of staff. None of them thought perhaps there would be an inappropriate appearance of conflict because Cheney had come from Halliburton. They didn't see it that way.
Mr. Cheney has said he played no role whatsoever in government contract decisions involving Halliburton.
Sheer deception. Great.
The American war machine has long relied on private contractors, supplying everything from security guards to short-order cooks. That principle of buying in expertise isn't in question. The bravery of civilian employees not in doubt. But it's the corporate excesses in Iraq that have angered those who expected better. The KBR auditor, Barrington Godfrey, got back from leave after a suicide bomber attacked the Mosul base. He found out that a KBR supervisor had used the bombing to milk the government of an extra $1 million in unnecessary charges.
This was the most disappointing part of my KBR career, that somebody would take advantage of such a tragedy, where I think there were at least 23 people killed, including U.S. soldiers, contractor staff, and KBR staff were killed.
You've heard a lot about Halliburton lately. Criticism is okay. We can take it. Criticism is not failure. Our employees are doing a great job. We're feeding the soldiers. We're rebuilding Iraq. Will things go wrong? Sure they will. It's a war zone. We're serving the troops because of what we know, not who we know.
Halliburton, proud to serve our troops.